The desert has always been a place where maps become myths, and myths become warnings. It is in this liminal stretch of sand and stone, where the horizon folds into a single, scorching line, that a small band of independent investigators, self-styled truth seekers, found themselves drawn by a faded vellum that had survived a century of neglect. The map was not printed. Its lines were drawn with a hand that seemed to tremble between reverence and fear. Symbols resembling an eye and a spiral coexisted with crude cartographic marks, and in the margin a single sentence had been scrawled in a hurried, ink-blotted script. Here lies the eye, the gateway the few have guarded.
The team, four individuals bound more by obsession than by friendship, had each arrived at the edge of the Mojave with a different motive, yet they shared a common certainty. The United States government concealed something far older than any of its classified projects, something that the elite had nurtured in silence. The map, which one of them had uncovered in a forgotten bunker beneath an abandoned mining town, promised coordinates that did not correspond to any known military installation. It pointed instead toward a spot described only as the void where the sky meets stone. When the sun sank behind the distant ranges, casting long, blood-red shadows across the dunes, the team set up a camp a few miles from the indicated point. The night was a vacuum of sound. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The leader, a former geologist who had turned his analytical mind to conspiracies, spoke later that they would be the first to stand at the threshold of a place the world had never seen. He expressed that the map's author must have been part of a lineage that had guarded the site for generations, passing the knowledge down in whispers and symbols. Their purpose, he said, was not merely to observe but to intervene, for the machine at the heart of the eye complex was awakening. The following morning they began the trek across cracked salt flats and rocky outcrops. Their progress was slow, hampered by heat that rose like an invisible wall, and by the feeling that they were being watched by unseen eyes. One of them, an archivist who had spent years cataloging declassified files, remarked that the coordinates aligned not with any known base but with a region of the desert that was omitted from satellite maps. He suggested that the government had deliberately pixelated the area in digital imagery, a technique he had seen used to obscure the presence of hidden facilities. The archivist inferred that the omission was a clue, a sign that the location was indeed a place of intentional concealment. By the third day they reached the coordinates, and there, half buried in the shifting dunes, rose a structure that made the horizon recoil. It was a monolithic slab of concrete, roughly cylindrical, its surface scarred by weathering but unmistakably engineered. The slab tilted slightly upward, its broad face concave, resembling a gigantic acoustic lens oriented toward the heavens. Its rim was broken in places, exposing a dark void within that seemed to swallow the light. The concrete bore faint markings, symbols that mirrored those on the map, an eye surrounded by concentric circles, and tiny glyphs that could be read only by those who knew the language of the old cults. The team stood in a circle around the structure, each feeling the weight of history pressing against their skins. The geologist, whose name the narrator never learned, said that the shape could not be a simple storage bunker. Its geometry suggested a function that amplified rather than contained. He argued that the curvature would focus sound or some other wave, turning the slab into a receiver or transmitter of frequencies beyond ordinary comprehension. The archivist added that ancient texts spoke of the eye that watches the void, a device used by priest-kings to commune with forces beyond the earth. Together, they concluded that the slab was a relic of a forgotten civilization, repurposed by the modern elite as a gateway. They set up equipment, a series of portable generators, a low-frequency recorder, and a makeshift EMF meter around the perimeter. As the sun dipped again, the desert cooled, and the slab began to reflect the last amber light in a way that seemed almost alive. The geologist, who had become the de facto leader, claimed that the slab was receiving something, that a hum could already be felt in the bones of the sand. He suggested that the sound was not audible to ordinary ears but was a resonance that could be detected by the instruments they had brought. The recorder, according to the technician, was picking up a low, pulsing vibration that increased in amplitude with each passing minute. When night fully claimed the sky and the stars emerged, pinpricks of cold fire against the black, the slab's surface glowed faintly, as if phosphorescent minerals were being excited. The EMF meter spun wildly, its needle dancing beyond the calibrated range. The archivist reported that the readings corresponded to frequencies historically associated with the Great Silence, a term used by obscure 19th century occultists to describe a frequency that supposedly opened doors to other dimensions. He argued that if the slab were indeed a transmitter, it had been dormant for centuries, awaiting a catalyst, perhaps a modern power source, to wake it. Hours stretched, and the feeling of being watched intensified. The wind, which had howled across the dunes in earlier days, now seemed to whisper directly into the crew's ears, forming words that no one could quite catch. The geologist, who had been muttering calculations under his breath, said that the structure was aligning itself with celestial bodies, that its axis pointed exactly at the pole star during a specific segment of the night. He concluded that the eye was meant to channel something from the cosmos into the earth at that precise moment. As midnight approached, the low hum rose to a crescendo, a sound that could not be heard but rather felt, an oppressive vibration that made the desert floor tremble. The recorder captured a series of syllabic tones that did not belong to any known language, a pattern that seemed to repeat every 13 seconds. The technician claimed that the pattern resembled a calling, an invitation, though the word itself was absent from any human lexicon. The archivist, poring over the glyphs now illuminated by the slab's inner glow, believed that the symbols were an instruction set, a key to activate the device. He deduced that the ancient guardians had embedded a safeguard. Only those who could interpret the symbols correctly could control the transmission. Just as the hum reached its peak, a fissure opened at the base of the slab. The crack widened, emitting a thin, silvery mist that rose like a ghostly plume into the night. The mist swirled, coalescing into shapes that suggested faces, eyes that opened and closed in a rhythm matching the pulse of the hum. The geologist whispered that the machine was alive, that it was not a machine at all but a conduit, an organ through which an alien consciousness could speak. He suggested that the elite had been trying to harness this conduit for centuries, using the veil of secrecy to shield humanity from the consequences. The mist thickened, and the horizon seemed to bend. The desert sand, once static, began to ripple as though it were water, forming waves that reflected the starlight in impossible colors. The sky itself appeared to fold inward, a rip in the firmament that revealed a darkness beyond comprehension, a void punctuated by faint glimmers of distant, incomprehensible structures. The team felt as if they were standing on the edge of a precipice, looking into a chasm that threatened to swallow them whole. The archivist asserted that they were witnessing the edge, the point at which reality and the other, what the secret societies called the void, converge. He argued that the ancient worshippers had built the eye not to observe the void but to invite it, to open a portal for an entity they called the coming. The geologist, his voice trembling, said that the purpose of the machine was to become a beacon, a lighthouse for those waiting in the cosmic sea, and that the elite had been lighting it for generations. He claimed that the machine's activation would herald an arrival, an event that would upend the natural order. The technician, who had been handling the equipment with shaking hands, noted that the instruments were failing, their displays turning to static, their cables turning to ash. He believed that the machine was drawing power not from electricity but from something far more primal, a force that fed on the very fabric of reality. In that moment, a decision presented itself as both inevitable and impossible. The team could attempt to shut down the slab, to sever its connection before it fully opened. Or they could step back, allowing the ancient covenant to proceed, trusting that the world would somehow survive the incursion. The geologist argued that the only ethical path was to stop the machine, lest humanity be overwhelmed by a presence it was not prepared to meet. He suggested that the ancient guardians had erred in believing that they could control what they summoned. The archivist countered that the machine had already been activated by the elites. The only way to stop the imminent arrival was to reverse the process, to retune the frequencies and collapse the conduit. He believed that the ancient knowledge, encoded in the glyphs, offered a method to shut it down, a reverse call that could seal the eye. The technician, his mind fragmented by the strange vibrations, said that the only guarantee was that they would not survive the act. He explained that any physical interaction with the slab could trigger a cascade that would collapse the entire desert into an abyss, an event that would be recorded in geological strata as a cataclysmic event. Yet he also whispered that the slime of the void was already licking at the edges of their perception. The longer they remained, the more they would be absorbed. The decision rested, the narrator observed, on a balance of dread and duty, on the weight of the unknown. They chose, as the narrator recounts, to try to deactivate the machine. The geologist, using a handheld spectrometer, attempted to map the frequencies and then invert them. The archivist, guided by the glyphs, traced a pattern in the sand, hoping to replicate the ancient seal that would interrupt the transmission. The technician, despite his fear, rigged a makeshift device that could overload the slab's inner circuitry with a surge of electromagnetic energy, an act that in theory would fry the conduit. As they executed their plan, the mist thickened further, taking on a hue that seemed to pulse in synchrony with their heartbeats. The hum rose to a deafening pitch, not audible, but felt as a pressure that threatened to split the skull. The slab's surface began to crack, a spider-like web of fissures spreading outward. The geologists reported that the reverse frequencies were being generated, that the EMF meters showed an inversion of the previously recorded pattern. The archivist believed that the glyphs had been correctly aligned. He felt a sensation of release as if a knot in the universe were being untied. The technician engaged his improvised overload, and a surge of light, blinding, white, pure, burst from the fissure, shooting straight into the void above. The moment the surge struck, the mist recoiled as if struck by a blade. The shadows that had been moving within it gave a final, anguished scream, a sound that could only be described as a collective sigh of entities being banished back to whatever realm they had been trying to invade. The desert, suddenly, fell silent. The wind stopped its whispers, and the stars shone as they always had, indifferent and distant. The slab, now fractured, stood as a broken monolith, its concave face cracked open, its interior a dark, empty cavity. The team, exhausted and shaken, gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. The geologist, his voice hoarse, said that they had averted a disaster, that the world would continue unaware of the brush with the void. He noted that the scar on the slab would likely be covered over, that the government would quickly move in to sanitize the site, to erase any trace of the eye. The archivist, his eyes fixed on the broken glyphs, wondered whether the ancient guardians had truly intended the eye to be a beacon, or whether they had merely built a warning that had been ignored for centuries. He suggested that the damage done could yet be repaired by another generation, that the secret societies would find another way to resurrect the conduit. The technician, his hands trembling, claimed that he could still feel the residual vibration, a low hum that lingered in the bones of the desert, a reminder that the void never truly sleeps. As they trekked back toward their vehicles, the narrator noted that the desert seemed to watch them go, its dunes shifting to conceal the evidence of what had occurred. The sun rose, casting a pale light over the broken slab, now just another ruin among countless others scattered across the barren landscape. The team left behind a scar that would eventually be erased by sandstorms, a scar that was both a warning and a promise. The story concludes not with a full resolution, but with a lingering question. The narrator, ever distant, points out that the map that had led them to the eye had another annotation, one that had previously been unnoticed amid the ink blotches. It read, "When the eye is closed, the world will turn its gaze elsewhere." The implication, the narrator suggests, is that the closure of one portal may open another, that the elite have many such machines hidden across the globe, waiting for the moment when humanity can no longer deny their presence. The final image is of a distant horizon, where another faint glimmer, indistinguishable from a mirage, shimmers in the heat, hinting at another monolithic structure waiting to be discovered, perhaps already humming, awaiting its own waking.
Thus the tale remains open, a thread left dangling over an abyss, leaving one to wonder whether the truth seekers truly succeeded, or merely postponed an inevitable convergence. The desert holds its secrets close, and the world spins on, unaware of the thin veil that separates the known from the unfathomable.